So the S&B Cold Air Intake with the oiled filter should be at the top of your short list if you own a 15 or newer 5-liter powered F150 and you're looking for one of the most affordable closed element cold air intakes that does not require a tune in order to get some decent horsepower and torque gains. Now, at around the $300 price point, this is one of the less expensive closed element options. Now, if you're on the fence about going between a closed element and an open element design, the closed element design will functionally be a little bit better because it pulls in colder and denser air to the engine, therefore making more power than an open element design. Now, even though the closed element design provides a little bit better performance than an open element design, you might think a lot of them look a little bit boring because, well, again, they're closed, you don't get to see anything inside. What I like about the S&B intake is they have this really cool plexiglass window on there with some pretty cool hardware to fasten it down, and that lets you see the high flow filter inside, which is also a nice way of gauging whether you need to pull the filter out and re-oil it. So it's safe to say in terms of functionality and overall looks, I really think that the S&B Cold Air Intake drives it home, and honestly, I don't really see any cons with this one in particular. I'm also happy to say that it is CARB certified in all 50 states, so if you live somewhere like California and they don't like aftermarket mods, you will still stay street legal with this intake even still. Lastly, it installs very easily. The design of this intake is pretty straightforward. It is a bolt-on design. You don't have to reroute or wire anything like that, so for that reason, I'm going to give the install very easy, 1 out of 3 wrenches on my difficulty meter. You can definitely get this done in about an hour, and that's if you're taking your time. You only need a couple of hand tools like a screwdriver and some sockets. To install your S&B intake, you will need a standard drive ratchet, a 7, 8, and 13 millimeter socket, and a Phillips head screwdriver. Optional tools include a long extension and 16 and 19 millimeter wrenches. Alright guys, so once you got your tools together, you can start ripping into the factory intake, and it comes off pretty easily. The first step is tackling some bolts and some clamps. There's one 13 millimeter bolt right here inside the fender, and that's holding the factory air box in place, so obviously you're going to need that 13 millimeter socket and your ratchet. Once you've loosened that bolt, move your way over to the throttle body, and you're going to loosen the band clamp securing the factory intake tube to it, and for that you're going to need a 7 millimeter socket. It's also helpful to have an extension. All right, once you got your clamp and hose removed, go ahead and pull these 2 lines on the factory tube. This is your PCV hose, and you also have a breather hose just above it. All right, so once you pop those 2 lines, the last step is removing the 2 push pins on the factory duct here. You can use a flathead screwdriver to pop those guys out, and once you've done so, you can actually remove the entire air box and tube assembly from the vehicle. All right, so once you got your factory intake removed, you can start installing the S&B system. But real quick, we can take a moment here to see both on the table, and you can see what an upgrade the S&B box is over the factory intake. Without mincing words here, this thing is tiny, it's dinky. That little paper element in there just doesn't do a good job of moving a lot of air. So the big star of the show here is S&B's massive air box, obviously in comparison to the much smaller one. I also like how this thing looks. Aesthetically speaking, it's kind of OEM in appearance, and I actually like that. It's not crazy and flashy, but you still get some cool looks under the hood because, again, we have that little plexiglass window here, so you can still see that nice high flow filter inside. But before we ditch this guy permanently, we do have to pull some hardware off of here. Specifically, I'm referring to that little rubber grommet with the little metal O-ring inside. That's meant for that 13 millimeter bolt that secures the air box inside the fender. We are reusing that, so go ahead and pop that guy out real quick. All right, once you got that rubber O-ring in place, you can install the rubber ductwork here on the front of the inlet. Go ahead and line up the holes here on the box itself. Then you're gonna grab these double-sided little rivets here, pop some inside and pop some on the outside. They got little teeth on them that'll line up and they'll lock together. All right, next you can throw on the rubber coupler here for this little pass-through. This is where your new tube's gonna go through. Make sure this little tab here on the bottom is facing down. Once you got that seated, go ahead and grab the largest band clamp provided in the kit, throw it over top of this guy, and you can tighten it down using an 8mm socket. All right, now your air box is ready to go. We're almost ready to install our system, but before we do that, we have to install the fittings here for our breather tube and our PCV hose. Now, these do have aluminum threads on them, and you are going into a plastic fitting inside of here, so you don't want to over crank them. The threads may not go in all the way. You just want to make sure they're good and tight, and to do that, you can use a 16mm and a 19mm wrench. All right, now your intake tube is all ready to go. We can finally start installing the S&B system. So go ahead and grab your air box and also grab that 13mm bolt that you pulled out earlier. And obviously go ahead and grab your 13mm socket and your ratchet in order to secure the air box in the truck. All right, once you got that bolt in place, go ahead and pop the rubber duct in place using the provided push pins in the kit. All right, with your air box secured, go ahead and throw the air filter inside the box. This will not be able to clear everything once you got the tube in there, so you gotta throw this in before you install your tube. All right, with your filter inside the box, you can throw your intake tube on the throttle body, and you can also thread the larger part of the tube into the air box itself. You want to grab the rubber coupler here for the throttle body side. Go ahead and grab the 2 remaining clamps in the kit and get those ready as well. You're going to need an 8mm socket to tighten those down. Now, a little helpful tip here, you can actually spray down the rubber coupler and inside of the air box with some WD-40. It just makes things a lot easier when you go to fit everything in place. All right, once you got your tube in place, go ahead and plug in your PCV hose as well as your vacuum line. All right, now that your tube is in place, your lines are secure, go ahead and throw the filter onto the tube, and you're going to tighten down this clamp with that 8mm socket. It's also helpful to have an extension. All right, with your air filter tightened down, go ahead and throw your plexiglass cover in place like so. Make sure all the holes line up, and then throw the screws in place and tighten those down with a Phillips head screwdriver. So once you got your plexiglass window tightened down, that'll wrap up the install. And that also wraps up my review of the S&B Cold Air Intake with the oiled filter fitting your 15 or newer 5-liter powered F150. I'm Travis, thanks for watching, and for all things F150, keep it right here at AmericanTrucks.com.